Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Professor Kimi Pekpo, and I'm delighted and honored to be here to talk to you about the aesthetic fact. Now, it may seem like a strange way to approach post-truth, but Whitehead's preference for aesthetic delight over brutal fact offers some very original insights into how judgments are made. The existence of imaginative literature should have warned logicians that their narrow doctrine is absurd, he argues. It is difficult to believe that all logicians commence by judging whether the initial proposition be true or false. Surely at some point in the reading, judgment is eclipsed by aesthetic delight, a mere lure for feeling. In the contemporary context, Whitehead provides an intuitive grasp of the workings of present-day fictioning machines. Whitehead specifically referred to an audience's joy on experiencing a particular imaginative actor reading Shakespeare's to be or not to be speech from Hamlet. But this could in effect imply any experience of an affecting piece of art, a novel, painting, installation. The effect of the art elicits a very different kind of measure of fact. It appeals to an audience on an aesthetic register of experience, occasioning what Whitehead would call a value based on elements in feeling. This notion of feeling is not, as logical positivists would have it, opposed to fact. Feelings are not a personal or irrational felt experience. Feelings instead act like a powerful, impersonal lure that draws an audience into the delightful experience of the fact. What is at once peculiar and fascinating about this Whitehead's Feely measure of fact is that he is the famed co-author of Principia Mathematica, a book that attempted to define fundamentals of pure logic.
So one might assume that if Whitehead were around today, he would perhaps take a decidedly logical position on post-truth. He might even self-identify with present-day logical positivists who continue to grasp both truth as a preferential problem of appealing to irrational feelings, personal beliefs or cherry-picked desires rather than a necessary commitment to brutal fact.
But no. Whitehead's speculative philosophy would look to problematize the logician's brutalist grip on fact. He argued against the imposition of mathematical abstraction, e.g. points and grids, on nature, arguing instead for a kind of radical empiricism wherein nature was experienced through the abstractions of sense data. Feelings for Whitehead are broadly conceived of, but they are certainly not regarded at any level as mere interferences in the processes of reasoning. Speculative philosophy would also loosen the status of truth and falsity on the distinct counterparts at the polar ends of a spectrum. It purposefully challenges the positivistic distinction made between brutal fact and untrustworthy felt experiences by arguing for a measurement of fact founded on the intensity of experience, gauged as something he goes on to call the aesthetic fact. In these sessions, we want to draw a theoretical line between Whitehead's aesthetic fact and contemporary user experiences of post-truth. To some extent, the post-truth collides with lingering positivistic assumptions concerning the nature of human-computer interaction. Indeed, the deep human entanglement with vast networks of logic machines seems to presuppose that individuals inhabit a distinct informational environment, mostly determined by the empowering forces of logic and brutal fact. As follows: problematic encounters with misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation, as well as dubious appeals made to feelings, beliefs, and desires, can be overcome by simply making information more transparent on the network. It is apparent abundance of transparent data, alongside certain skills of discernment, that are supposed to counter efforts made to intentionally misinform or keep a population purposefully uninformed, and therefore vulnerable to rumor, conspiracy, and fabrication. There are nevertheless intrinsic inconsistencies in the logics of informational processing, which positivists seem to have overlooked. This means that humans and computers are not only struggling to discern precisely between true and false statements, but they are also readily failing to temper the alluring influence of aesthetic facts. Significantly, though, Whitehead's aesthetic register of experience must not be confused with personal feelings that positivists assume interfere with rational decision-making processes. Indeed, the feeling of fact and fake is located on a far more complex spectra of intensive and impersonal experience with multiple polarities. There are spectral experiences that appear to move beyond the polar extremes of brutal fact on one hand and irrational, emotional, and illogical reasoning on the other. To be sure, the speculative nature of spectral experiences is intended to unshackle the dominant grip of brutal fact as a force opposed to visceral registers of experience. On the spectra of experience, the often forced distinction made between exact truth and falsity collapsed into moments of indistinction. This does not mean that we have to deny that things can ever be true or false. However, making a clear distinction between statements, as Whitehead notes, generally refuses to be pushed to meticulous exactness. The diagram of spectral experience is designed to problematize conventional distinctions made between fact, fake, and feeling, which have often been used to justify opposing positions on the post-truth debate.
It means that your order has been dispatched.
If you are watching this, then I am sorry to have to tell you that we have all gone home, and you have missed the boat. This film of me speaking to you was left on the shores to distract anyone not chosen to follow us back to the planet Utopion. We find a distinct impasse here. On one hand, positivists point to the untrustworthy nature of subjective feelings, beliefs, and desires as causal actors in contagions of fake news. Personal emotional responses are often regarded as the polar opposites of objective rational judgments made about what is fact or fake. Rationalists who follow a cognitive, theoretical frame similarly tend to relegate personal feelings to a marginal status in their analogical grasping of brains and computers. On the other hand, postmodernists continue to position fact itself as an imploding reality effect, floating around on an illusory representational plane. This is not fact as it is opposed to feeling, but rather fact as it might appear in Wonderland, down a rabbit hole. The spectra of experience are intended to provide a means by which fact and fakes can be grasped by feeling the intensity of experience on an aesthetic register. This means unraveling and moving beyond the positivist, postmodern impasse. For example, the strategic faking of news and the weaponizing of so-called search engine data voids often occurs when we experience a shock event, like the horror of a mass shooting. Our experience of these shock events relates to both logical inconsistencies and aesthetic facts, which emerge from a kind of speculative spreading of panic, rumor, and eventual conspiracy. These are intensive moments of speculative contagion that produce what Gabriel Tart calls modes of sleepwalking subjectivity. Indeed, although the feeling of individual consciousness and an associated sense of personal volition might seem to provide a centered command post of experience, the aesthetic fact is experienced as a mere foothold a sleepwalker has in the speculative spreading of a shock event. It is not, therefore, a matter of waking the docile sleepwalker to the brutal reality of fact, or indeed making a choice between a red or a blue pill. Ultimately, the strangest and most rewarding factor of Whitehead's aesthetic ontology is the revelation that the lure of feeling is impersonal. Like this, sleepwalkers are caught in the shock waves of the event, which lures them, feels them, and carries them along on a flux. Indeed, it is not the truth-seeking subject that decides these encounters with shock events. On the contrary, it is the aesthetic of the event itself, its capacity to lure and feel, which decides how subjects are made.